again. And so today I thought to continue from last week. I started talking about afflictions, working with afflictions, disturbing emotions. So I'll continue with that today. Take a few moments to remember the positive altruistic motivation you generated earlier today, or feel free to generate a new one using new thoughts, words that work for you, to really try to make sure that your motivation for being here, joining this session, is one that considers not just your own happiness, but the happiness of others, all living beings, if that's possible. And in thinking in terms of attaining the highest state, enlightenment, for the benefit of all beings. So last week I spent most of the time talking about how when we're working with afflictions, disturbing emotions in our mind, it's best to try to do this without beating ourselves up and getting into attitudes like hating ourselves, criticizing ourselves, and so on. And today I'd like to talk a bit more about some of the actual methods for working with um, disturbing emotions that were taught by the Buddha. But I thought before that I would share some things that I have found helpful in dealing with self-hatred, because this is something I've been working on for a long time and still working on. So there's certain things that I found have been helpful, and I thought to share those. So first, we need to notice what's going on in our mind. We need to be aware if and when there are these kind of thoughts or attitudes like hating ourselves, because especially if this is a habit, a long-term habit, maybe as long as you've been alive, and so it's just like your normal way of thinking, and you don't even realize it's happening. So first we have to be able to notice what's going on in our mind. So to do that, mindfulness is very helpful. Mindfulness in the sense of noticing what is going on in our mind, paying attention to our thoughts. We can share these slides with you. You don't have to worry about taking, I'm just saying, you don't have to take a photo of it. Just mindfulness, noticing what is happening in our mind, what kind of thoughts are there, what kind of monologue is going on in our mind. And then introspective awareness. This is something that usually accompanies mindfulness. When we have mindfulness, then this arises as well. And this is this is what's compared to like a security guard in a bank that's watching the people coming in and going out and is on the lookout for trouble in case some, troublemakers come into the bank to make trouble. Then the security guard's job is to look out for them, notice them, and then deal with them. So in a similar way, introspective alertness watches our mind and is able to discern which types of thoughts are helpful and skillful, which types of thoughts are unhelpful and unskillful, so that we can deal with the unskillful ones. So cultivating those qualities, and it's a gradual process, but this is very much part of our practice of meditation. Then when we do happen to notice self-critical thoughts, it's good to try to take a step back from them and ask ourselves, is this really the way that I want to talk to myself? I remember doing this once. There was this really negative self-talk going on in my mind, and I looked at it and I said, would I talk to anybody else like that? And I thought, no way. I mean, when I was a kid with my siblings, we would, get into fights and we'd say nasty things to each other. But I think maybe still did that a little bit when I was a teenager. But, when I got older, especially after becoming a Buddhist, I can't remember ever saying anything horrible and nasty to anybody. I might have the thoughts sometimes, but I wouldn't let them come out of my mouth. And so, yeah, when I tried to imagine saying the kind of words that I'm saying to myself, saying those to somebody else, I was like, shocking. I would never talk to somebody else. I would never say things like that to somebody else. So then, why am I saying this to myself? Why do I think it's okay to talk to myself that way? So that's something you might try. And yeah. So it's most probably just a habit, something that's been going on for a long time, and we never tried to stop it. We never knew how to stop it. It would just keep going. So it became like a habit, a pattern. But yeah, it's like harsh speech, right? That non-virtue, one of the four non-virtues of speech, harsh speech, and saying hurtful, unkind, nasty words. So if we can recognize that that kind of speech isn't skillful and it's negative, then it makes sense to stop that, even if it's only inside our mind and not actually coming out of our mouth. But if we make a habit of that, if we keep doing that again and again to ourselves, then it's quite possible one day we get really angry at somebody and we'll say things like that to somebody else. So if we can recognize that that type of speech, internal or external, is unwise and unskillful, then just make a firm decision to stop it. I guess yesterday with Venerable Jigme, you had a discussion about speech, and she asked you to look at internal speech as well as external speech. Yeah, so I think it's good to recognize that even the internal speech we may indulge in about ourselves, if it's harsh, nasty, cruel, unkind, then that's something to be stopped. And then another thing I find helpful, maybe not everyone would find this helpful, is just to recall the Buddha's and Bodhisattva's compassion. So it said that in the minds of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, there's only love and compassion and forgiveness and patience, no anger, no matter what anybody does. Yeah, even people who do really awful, awful things, like the Nazis, Hitler and the Nazis, and that's just one example, but many examples of people who really do horrible, horrible things. But even towards people like that, the Buddhas don't feel angry, they don't feel critical, they don't reject anyone. They have just love and compassion. And so if they're able to feel that way towards real harm doers, then why would they not feel that way towards me? So, yeah. And sometimes when I'm visualizing the Buddha or visualizing Chenrezig, I'll spend some time just contemplating that, just trying to imagine how they look at me, what their view is of me, and try to get a little taste of that in myself. And think, okay, this is what I need to develop in my mind. And the third one, yeah, to contemplate that afflictions are impermanent and not who we are. So afflictions like anger, jealousy, greed, pride, and so forth are impermanent phenomena. Like every part of us, every one of our aggregates, every part of our body and mind, all are impermanent. They come and they go. None of them are permanent. And you've probably heard the teaching on Buddha nature and how, the afflictions are not in the nature of our mind. The nature of our mind is pure. Afflictions are transitory. I really like the analogy of the sky, that our mind is similar to the sky. It's vast and spacious. And then afflictions and all the various kinds of thoughts that we have are like clouds that pass through the sky. They're not permanent, they just come and they go. And the sky remains vast and spacious and pure. Um, so, contemplating that idea, and you can see it for yourself. You can see how an affliction isn't always there in your mind. Sometimes it's there, but sometimes it's not. So you can see that for yourself. You're not always angry, you're not always greedy, you're not always jealous. So then contemplating that can help you to see, yeah, these are impermanent, and in a similar way, they are not who we are. The afflictions come and go, and we're still here. And there are times when we have the opposite mental states to the afflictions. Instead of being angry, we have love. Instead of being selfish, we are unselfish. Instead of being greedy, we are content and unattached. So we can see, if we watch our experience, that these afflictions are not always there, and they're not really who we are, because they're transitory, and because we also have the opposite states of mind, the positive, virtuous, beneficial states of mind. So contemplating that is helpful. And you've probably heard one of the methods for working with anger towards someone else, like when somebody else does something that we regard as negative, or we see some attribute in them that we don't like. A helpful technique is to separate the person and their behavior or their attitude. Okay, and realize they're not one and the same thing. Because our tendency is to see them as one and the same thing. Joe Blow, kicks a dog, and then we get really angry at Joe Blow, as if, kicking a dog is his real nature. He's always in that mode of being. But it's not like that. People get afflicted, afflictions arise in their mind, and they act them out in harmful ways, negative ways. But that's not who they really are. That's just a temporary situation because of causes and conditions. And so it's very helpful to think, okay, there's Joe, and he's a good person. He has a lot of good qualities. He has a Buddha nature and so on. But at that point in time, he did something I don't agree with, something wrong. So I condemn that action, but not the person. Don't condemn the person. Yeah? You've probably heard that idea. And so that's really helpful in dealing with somebody else. We can also do it with ourselves. Separate the person we are and the afflictions that come and go in our mind. Also, mistakes that we make, stupid things or negative things that we do. That's something else that can happen. We keep beating ourselves up, feeling bad about mistakes that we've made, and that can carry on for years and years and years. So again, okay, I did that harmful thing and I regret it. I've purified it. I'm still purifying it and trying not to do that again. But just to see that isn't who I am. Now, don't continue identifying with that particular thing. So separate the person and the unskillful behavior or attitude. Does that make sense? So I'm just throwing out these ideas, but ideally, it's good to meditate on them, contemplate them, use them when you do notice self-hatred, self-criticalness coming up. Then the fourth bullet point, there are antidotes to afflictions, but it takes time to overcome them. So there are antidotes. There's like two different ideas there. There are antidotes, there are tools, methods, strategies that we can use to reduce our afflictions. Similar to, how there's different kinds of medicines for different kinds of diseases. Okay, so if there's a disease, an injury, or whatever, there's medicine, usually, for most diseases. There's things you can take, things you can do to counteract them and cure yourself. So in the same way, there are antidotes to anger, antidotes to attachment, antidotes to jealousy. These are like medicines we can take to overcome those afflictive emotions and eventually be free of them altogether. But this is a gradual process. We can't expect it's going to happen overnight or even in 1 week, 1 month, 1 year. It actually takes years, unfortunately. Yeah. I've heard some of my teachers say there's a saying about afflictions. You probably heard this too, that following afflictions is as easy as a boulder rolling down a hill, but having positive thoughts, virtuous thoughts, positive thoughts is like trying to push a boulder up a hill. You heard that? No? I was kind of relieved when I heard that because I found it so hard to overcome afflictions and also so hard to generate positive states of mind. So this is what the Tibetans say. So it's their experience. Maybe it even goes back to the Indian masters. This is just how it is. And they say it's because we've been in samsara for so long, countless lifetimes. And most of the time, most of our time spent in samsara, we've been afflicted. Yeah, we've been caught up in attachment and aversion and jealousy and, of course, ignorance and all the other afflictions. So we're much more habituated to afflictions than we are to virtuous states of mind. The amount of time we have spent cultivating virtuous states of mind, doing virtuous activities is much, much less than our familiarity with the afflictions. So it's because of that they arise so much more easily without effort, effortlessly. But when it comes to generating virtuous states of mind, we usually have to make effort. Sometimes we have to make a lot of effort to generate those. So that's just how it is. And it doesn't mean you're bad. You shouldn't feel bad about that. It's the experience of so many people over the centuries trying to follow this path. So I think understanding that can help you not feel so bad when afflictions keep coming up in your mind, even though you know you shouldn't feel that way, you don't want to feel that way, but they keep coming up. So we just have to accept that it does take time. And then the next point, others have them too. I don't know if that's helpful for everybody. You can check. But in case you think you're the only person in the world who gets angry, or you're the only person in the world who has jealousy, well, that's probably not true. And you might even think you're the worst person in the world. I remember reading one lady went to Dharamsala and was attending teachings by His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and maybe he was teaching the Lamrim or something, and so there was a lot of talk about the afflictions, and she was sitting there listening to this, and she said at the end she thought she was the worst person in the world. So I can relate to that, and she's probably not the only one who's had that experience. When you hear the descriptions of the afflictions, non-virtuous states of mind, non-virtuous actions, and you think, oh yeah, I have that one, and I have that one too, and oh, that one, yeah. Oh. You can end up feeling that way. But, be realistic. And, if you think about people like terrorists, I mean, we shouldn't compare. That's not helpful. But sometimes it is helpful to compare. Think about some of the things people in this world are doing and some of the attitudes that people have. And you'll probably realize, well, maybe I'm not the worst person in the world. So some people have it worse. So I find that helpful. I remember one time I was struggling with a lot of anger. Just a lot of anger was coming up in my mind, and it was around the same time as this war in Rwanda, where the Tutsis and the Hutus were killing each other, just like massacring each other with machetes, and it was just horrific. And so I felt awful about the anger in my mind. But then I thought about those people, and I thought, wow, how fortunate I am that I'm able to control my anger. Because I feel like I could understand how you can get to that point where you're just so full of anger, so full of hatred, you just go crazy and you just start killing your neighbors even. And then I thought, how fortunate I am that I've learned the Dharma, which teaches us how to work on anger and overcome anger. And those people and lots of other people in the world don't have this knowledge. They don't have these methods. And so they just don't know any other way but to follow the anger and the hatred and act it out and then create all this bad karma, all this suffering. So at that point in time, yeah, it was helpful for me to think about that. And then you can also generate compassion because you can say, yeah, I kind of understand how they feel and how awful that is, how, anger and hatred are just so painful. So then that can enhance your compassion for people who have these afflictions as well. Yeah, so that might be helpful. That's something you can try. And then the last bullet point is take the middle way, neither suppressing nor indulging them. So these are two ways that we might kind of spontaneously react when a disturbing emotion comes up in our mind. Suppressing is when we deny it, pretend it's not there. We have this expression, shoving it under the carpet. Yeah. So, for example, anger might come up in the mind, but you think, oh, I don't want to be angry. I shouldn't be angry. So you just kind of shove it down, stuff it, and try to ignore it. So is that helpful? I mean, maybe in a temporary sense, it can help you to avoid exploding and doing something harmful. But if you do it in a continuous way, you just keep suppressing it and never actually deal with it, work with it, it's not helpful. What I've heard is it can lead to illness It can lead to physical illness if you keep stuffing emotions. It can also lead to mental illness. And it's not a solution. You know, the emotion doesn't get dealt with, doesn't get solved. It's still there. And it will probably come up again and again and again. So recognize when that's happening, when you're just suppressing an emotion, and try to recognize that that isn't a helpful way. The other way is indulging, and that's when we allow ourselves to just get totally caught up in that disturbing emotion. And so our mind is just like totally obsessed with it, totally full of it, having lots of thoughts, and also maybe it's coming out in our actions, our speech, our bodily actions, and so on. So that's not helpful either, because then you can be creating non-virtue, creating problems for other people, creating problems for yourself. But also, indulging has the result of increasing it. You know, if you let yourself get caught up in and don't try to deal with it, then it's like feeding it. So it will come up again and again and again. It becomes habitual. So it's good to look at those two, the kind of extremes, suppressing on the one hand, indulging and acting out on the other. Those are like two extreme ways of handling an affliction. And if you look at them, you can hopefully recognize neither of them are helpful. And a middle way that avoids those two extremes is, first of all, to accept, to acknowledge the existence of that disturbing emotion in your mind, like being real about it, being honest. Okay, there is anger in my mind, instead of denying it. So that helps us avoid the first problem of suppressing and denying. And then, you know, focusing on that particular affliction and finding antidotes, solutions, working on it. There's lots of different tools. I'll talk about a few today, but there's even whole books about anger, for example, like Venerable Children's book, Working with Anger. Is that what it's called? Working with Anger. And there's a few others just about anger. There's also a few books about attachment. There's whole books full of methods, tools for working on disturbing emotions. So yeah, look for methods and try them out. And yeah, if you keep doing that, then they definitely do get resolved. Especially emptiness. Emptiness is the ultimate weapon or method. That's the way to completely eliminate all the afflictions from their root. So yeah, so try to avoid suppressing on the one hand, indulging or acting out on the other, and take that middle way of allowing yourself to acknowledge, to accept the existence of that disturbing emotion or that affliction, and then working with it, finding different tools, different antidotes. And I think it's good that there are many different antidotes, because I find myself in certain situations, one of the antidotes might work, but another one doesn't. In another situation, that one works, but this one doesn't. It's good to keep trying, like with medicine as well. You know, if you're trying to heal an illness, you may try different medicines, and some of them don't work. So you keep trying, and then eventually, hopefully, you'll find one that does work, that does take care of your problem. Okay, so these are just some tips on how to work with afflictive emotions while having a healthy attitude, not hating yourself, feeling bad, feeling ashamed, feeling guilty. So really try to look out for those kind of attitudes. And if you notice them, just understand, no, that's not helpful. That's just adding more afflictions, more confusion to the mess. I don't need that. And so try to do it in a way that you feel kind to yourself. And there's some really good books. I'll recommend a few. One is A Path with Heart by Jack Kornfield. I've read that a couple of times, and it's about the kind of problems we Westerners can get into when we're trying to follow a spiritual path. And he does talk in there about how I don't think he uses the term spiritual bypassing, but he talks about that phenomena. It happened to him, and it happens to many others as well. Um, and then Radical Acceptance by Tara Brach. She's a psychologist, but also a meditation practitioner and teacher. And so that talks about the need to accept ourselves in a radical way, meaning everything about ourselves. Yeah, without accepting ourselves as we are, we can't really grow, we can't really change. So we have to start with accepting ourselves. And then Self-Compassion by Kirsten Neff. She's a psychologist, also a meditator, and she spent like 10 years doing research on self-compassion and wrote this book and I think some other books as well. And she also has a website. So that talks about how important it is to have compassion for ourselves and how to do it. And Pema Chudran has some really excellent books as well. And she has a book called How to Meditate, and the subtitle is something like Making Friends with Your Mind. Is anyone familiar with that? Something about making friends with your mind. And I really like that phrase, because, when we're meditating, following a spiritual path, trying to, develop all these good qualities, we can sometimes, like be in conflict with ourselves, fighting with ourselves. So that's not helpful. So what's helpful is, self-compassion and learning to be friends with ourselves, friends with our mind. So, ideally we bring to this work compassion, patience, kindness towards ourselves, just as we need to feel these qualities for other people. Right? I think we can easily recognize those are the qualities that we need to have in our relationships with others and our interactions with others. But sometimes we neglect ourselves. We think it's okay to beat ourselves up, but we're nice to everybody else. But I mean, they do say that, if you don't love yourself, then it's hard to really love others. And I think there's some truth to that, because if you see things in yourself you don't like, you don't accept, and you may even hate, then when you see those same qualities in other people, you're going to feel the same way, right? You're going to also be hateful and critical and judgmental. I mean, that's my experience. So, if we really want to be fully open and loving, compassionate, and patient to others, then it is important to try to be that way towards ourselves. Okay, so then when it comes to working with afflictions, again, there's many, many different techniques or tools or strategies, whatever you want to call it. And we have very limited time here. But I thought to go through this list of 5 tools that were taught by the Buddha in Pali Sutra. The name of the sutra is down at the bottom. The Discourse on the Removal of Distracting Thoughts. It's in the Majjhima Nikaya. And these are also explained in Following the Buddha, Following Buddha's Footsteps, Volume 4, Following the Buddha's Footsteps, which Venerable Children is teaching now. It's on page 177 of that book. And so the Buddha taught these 5 methods with regard to the hindrances that can occur in meditation. And those hindrances include desire, like sense desire, uh, having desire, attachment to objects of the five senses, seeing, hearing, and so forth. And then ill will is another one. So, yeah, anyway, there's certain hindrances that can occur that interrupt concentration, the development of concentration. So the Buddha taught these tools for dealing with those hindrances that arise in meditation. But I think that they can also be helpful for um, afflictions that arise in our mind at other times as well, like in our daily life, while we're eating, while we're washing dishes, while we're walking around or working with other people. So at any time, if we, get afflicted, an affliction arises in our mind, then we could use one or more of these. So the first one is replace unwholesome thoughts with wholesome ones. So, for example, if you notice anger coming up in your mind, then switch to loving kindness. But that may be hard to do unless you're very, very, very familiar with loving kindness. But if you're not, then maybe something a little easier. One thing I find helpful, because I often have critical thoughts coming up in my mind when I notice a person doing something, behaving in a certain way, then there'll be this critical thought in my mind, and I can easily get caught up in that. But if I notice it and I want to stop that, then I'll bring to mind something good about the person, something positive, something good that they've done, or some good quality that I notice in them. So that's like switching channels. If your mind is caught in a negative channel, like a TV channel, then and you say no, I don't want to do this, this isn't right, then switch channels and find a different channel where you have positive thoughts, good thoughts. So something positive, replacing this negative state of mind, whatever is happening in your mind that's negative, unwholesome, afflictive, um, replace that with something positive. For attachment, it's good to recall impermanence, the impermanent nature of the object that you're attached to. It's not going to last, it's going to change, it's going to disappear one day, it's not completely satisfying. So think about impermanence, or think about the unsatisfactory nature of the object. The opposite, and for jealousy, a feeling of jealousy, that the opposite of that is rejoicing. So you notice yourself feeling jealous about another person, some good thing happening to them, good thing that they have, then try to switch to rejoicing. Even if it's not sort of how you really feel, but it's nice to just say that to yourself. I'm so happy for them. How wonderful that is. And you'll probably notice that feels a lot better. That's a much nicer way of thinking than jealousy. Okay, so that's one tool. Another one, next is reflect on the faults of unwholesome thoughts. So here we can contemplate what are the results, the consequences of having this kind of thought. Yeah, does it lead to happiness? Does it lead to benefit? Does it lead to enlightenment? Probably not. And it probably has a lot of faults, or what's the word I'm trying to think of? Yeah, the negative side of it. It makes me unhappy. I feel agitated. Maybe it interferes with my ability to sleep and eat, and even to be able to be happy right here and now. this way of thinking is an obstacle, much less for more long-term goals like enlightenment or becoming a bodhisattva and so on. So I find this one particularly helpful because if we can see the faults, the unwholesome consequences, the negative consequences of certain types of thoughts like anger, criticalness, jealousy, pride, and so forth, if we can see for ourselves, yeah, this doesn't lead to good. It just leads to suffering, to problems, to difficulties. Then we'll feel, I was talking about this last week, we will feel, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to let my mind get caught up in these kinds of thoughts. It's not good for me. It's not bringing me what I really want. It's not enabling me to fulfill my goals. It's just bringing the opposite of what I want. So if we can see that for ourselves, it's very empowering. Because then we, from our side, not because Buddha said so or teachers said so, but because we can see clearly for ourselves that this is interfering with where I want to go, the direction that I want to go in. And even at this very moment, yeah, it's disturbing me, not making me happy. So we can do that, on the mental level, do a contemplation about that. You could even take a piece of paper, divide it in half, and put the pros and the cons. What are the pros of this way of thinking? What are the cons of this way of thinking? And hopefully the cons will be a longer list. Yeah. In the teachings, there's some saying about how with anger, there's a lot of faults with anger. And it said that the only good thing about anger is that we can get rid of it. It's not permanent. It's not a permanent fixture in our mind, so we can overcome it. That's the only good thing about anger. And the same thing could be said about other afflictions as well. Although I think there is another another benefit of having these afflictions. Not really a benefit, but useful, something useful about them. And that is when they do arise in your mind, you can use meditation to look at them, to understand them, to apply antidotes to them. And then your understanding of that particular affliction grows. It becomes really rich. And it also enables you to then understand other people and how they get caught up in these afflictions and what it's like for them. And then it can enhance your renunciation, your determination to be free of samsara, and also your compassion for others and your bodhicitta. So if you work in a wise way, in a skillful way with afflictions, then it can be very beneficial. It all depends. So, I mean, in one way, we could even say that afflictions themselves aren't really bad. It's more how we deal with them, what we do when they arise. If they arise, like if anger arises in our mind and we just get totally caught up in it and indulge in it and act it out, then it's problematic. But if anger arises and we can immediately recognize it and then apply antidotes, work with it, we can learn a lot, grow a lot. So it all depends on how we respond when they arise. Then 3 is ignore it. And so this is similar to like if you see some sight that's really unpleasant or disturbing, you don't have to keep looking at it, right? You can look at something else instead. Yeah. Or when watching TV and some stupid commercial comes on, you don't have to watch it. You can mute it or change the channel or turn it off. Yeah. So, so in a similar way, when a disturbing thought or emotion comes up in our mind, we don't have to buy into it and get caught up in it. We can just ignore it. And if we ignore it, then it disappears. It's only when we pay attention to it, we get caught up in it, we get all, involved in it. That's like feeding it, like adding fuel to the fire. Then it can grow bigger and bigger. But if we just ignore it and go to number one, turn your attention to something positive, something constructive, then that negative thought has nothing to stand on. So it will fade, it will disappear. And that may sound a bit like denial or suppression, right? A negative thought comes up in your mind and you ignore it. So I don't think it's necessarily the same as denial or suppression. If you acknowledge if you're kind of not pretending it's there, if you're pretending it's not there, that's more like denial. But if you acknowledge the existence, you acknowledge, anger or whatever has arisen in my mind, but you're just choosing not to feed it, not to get caught up in it, doing something else instead. So then I think it's not really suppression. But I think we have to be careful about that. I think there could be a fine line between suppression, denial, spiritual bypassing, and this one. Does that make sense? So we just have to pay attention to what's going on in our mind and try to notice the difference between suppression and simply, I don't want to get involved in this. Then number 4 is analyze the causes and conditions that give rise to the afflictions. So this is particularly helpful, I think, with maybe a very strong feeling of anger or attachment. It's maybe something that's been in the mind a lot for a long period of time, and you can't just ignore it and let it go. It could be helpful to do some analysis and try to understand everything. All impermanent phenomena, all conditioned phenomena arise from causes and conditions. That's very much part of Buddha's teaching. So it's good to try to explore what are the causes and conditions for this this particular affliction arising in my mind. And this could take time, but it will be very helpful, because if you can kind of go to the root where this is coming from, why this is coming up, then that gives you more understanding of how to work with it, how to deal with it. And I think it's also helpful to learn more about Buddhism, because Buddhism does have a lot of explanations about the causes and conditions for things like afflictions. And in fact, if we have time, I have another slide we can go through specifically about the causes for afflictions to arise in our mind. So the more we can understand what those causes are, the more power we have to arrange our life, arrange our experiences, so that there's less chance, less likelihood for afflictions to arise in our mind. So the last one, I think this is actually what the Buddha said in the sutra: crush the mind with mind. It sounds pretty violent. Another book that where it mentioned these 5 had a somewhat different way of expressing this. Exerting dedicated resolve. So it simply means being very firm with our mind. And I think the idea is, if you've tried the other 4 tools or other methods and the affliction is still there, it's like very stubborn, it doesn't want to go away, then you have to be very firm. And I thought an analogy might be, a parent and their kids. If the kids are misbehaving, making a lot of noise, not behaving properly, and the parent has talked to them and tried to get them to stop misbehaving, and they don't stop, they don't listen. Finally, the parent may have to say, "Stop it, that's enough," really firm, not with anger, but just, with firmness. And then just keep standing there until they do stop. So we've probably had that experience with our parents or with our teachers in school. So that sort of attitude of being very firm and just saying to ourselves, no, this has to stop. This can't go on. It's not wholesome. It's not skillful. It's not wise. It's not what I want to do. So just being very firm and using your mind to kind of crush, but not with hatred or anger, just crush that negative way of thinking. So again, there are many other methods, many other tools, and I think, like I say, it's helpful to have different tools and try them out and see which ones work best for you. We're different. We have different personalities, different life experiences, and so on. So different methods can work for different people. So hopefully you'll find at least a few methods that are helpful for you in dealing with those disturbing emotions. And then, we need to just be very consistent, persistent, and work with them and not think that doing it once is enough. It's not like one in time of working on anger and then anger is going to go away and will never come back. So these are things we need to apply again and again and again. But I do find it does get easier if we, are very persistent in this work. It does get easier. And also cultivating positive states of mind, like the four immeasurable thoughts: love, compassion, joy, equanimity, faith, refuge. So the more we familiarize with these positive, constructive, virtuous states of mind, it's almost like, those kind of scales where they have two pans. And when you put more things on one side, the other side goes up. When you put more on this side, that side goes up. So before we start practicing, we probably have a lot more negative energy, a lot more afflictive thoughts and emotions, and the virtuous ones are lighter, lesser. But then as time goes on, we increase those, decrease those. Then eventually gets to where they're at an opposite level. There's more positive thoughts, positive energy, and fewer negative ones. So we still have to do this kind of work for a long time until we've completely eliminated the afflictions. And that requires direct realization of emptiness, which is not easy to attain. But so that's something we need to work on as well.
Another question, just a comment. There's a very good book that goes in depth in those 5 techniques. It's Beyond Distraction by Shaila Catherine. We have the book here. It's very, very good.
Yeah. She's an American woman who spent a lot of time meditating, and seems like she got quite high in her meditation. And she teaches in California. And so, there's a book of hers, a whole book just about these 5. And you had sent last winter, the winter before, you had sent a file you found on the internet, one monk in, I think it was a Western monk in Thailand or Burma or...
It's called Working with the 5 Hindrances from Ajahn Tiradamo. This book is just amazing. It's completely amazing. But this is, yeah,
And
this
it's
is a good,
free.
yeah.
You
Yeah, it's free.
download.
Yeah,
Yeah. Or
distribution.
you emailed it to us. Maybe you could also email
I can do it again if people want to just come to me after the teaching. I'm gonna send the link.
Yeah. Or put it on a little thing. Yeah. Because that's someone who'd spent quite a bit of time in retreat and working a lot of experience with hindrances. Yeah.
I guess, like all of us, I certainly deal with such thoughts, and I think the older you get, the more strategies that you've needed to apply. And I guess the one that I'm using currently is associated with the four immeasurables, and I give them to myself. The first one, I go the opposite to the way you guys say, but, without attachment or anger. So I think about the love of a child for its mother or a mother for its child. And then I apply that to myself. And on it goes, rejoicing in my well-being and, loving the things that I have achieved and wanting myself to be free from compassion and, acknowledging that I am on the path to an enlightenment which will lead to my ultimate happiness. About 10 minutes. I do it for about 10 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Using the four
Yeah.
immeasurables.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying at the moment.
Yeah. Tuche, did you want to?
For my request for training, I had talked about or requested for conscientiousness, and that's the mental factor of conscientiousness, and I have the definition I could read, but I'm wondering, because one of my questions was, like, how do you cultivate it? And I'm wondering if it's kind of like all of this that helps cultivate it. Would you like me to read the definition?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it says, a distinct mental factor that cherishes the accumulation of virtue and guards the mind against that which gives rise to afflictions. It brings to fulfillment and maintains all that is good, keeps the mind from contamination, and is the root for attaining all the grounds and paths.
Mm-hmm.
So is this
Sounds
kind
like
of
what we
stuff?
need.
Pardon?
Sounds like what we all need.
So is this kind of a way to cultivate it, or are there specific ways to cultivate conscientiousness?
I don't think I have encountered any specific. I'm just trying to find, yeah, specific ways for cultivating conscientiousness. Anyone who's been at the Abbey long term, have you heard venerable children talk about that? This is no long-term people here. They're all in their offices working. Yeah.
It just sounds so good, so I'd love to know how to cultivate it. But what you said today seems like it actually addresses part of it, at least.
Well, I'm looking at a text on the mental factors, and it says, this is from a Sangha. Conscientiousness is a cultivation of virtuous qualities within abiding in non-attachment, non-hatred, and non-ignorance, as well as effort. So those are actually four virtuous mental factors. Non-attachment is the opposite of attachment. Non-hatred is the opposite of hatred. Non-ignorance is the opposite of ignorance. And then effort is joyous effort, having delight in doing what's virtuous. So it sounds like those four virtuous mental factors, when they are all together, then you have this cultivation of virtuous qualities, which is conscientiousness. It guards the mind against contaminations, like, non-virtues and so on. It has the function of thoroughly completing and fully establishing all mundane and supramundane success. So it's non-attachment. It's the opposite to the three poisons. Non-attachment, non-hatred, non-ignorance, plus joyous effort. So perhaps if we can think of times when we had a lot of energy, like joyous energy. We felt really inspired by our refuge in the three jewels and our determination to follow the spiritual path. And our mind was not caught up in afflictions like those three poisons or laziness. And so I think we probably all experienced moments like that, or at least, a little bit of time like that. And we just really wanted to do what was virtuous and avoid what was non-virtuous. So I think probably at those times, then that mental factor is there, conscientiousness. But how to cultivate it? I would think, if you just work on cultivating those four factors of opposite to the three poisons plus joyous effort, then it seems to be, a combination of those arises from those. And so then you are just very careful, because the word conscientious in English means you're just very careful about what you're doing, and steering clear of things that are negative and non-virtuous, the cause of suffering, and really wanting to focus on the things that are positive and virtuous and the cause of happiness. But I'll see, I'll see if I can find any other source of information on how to cultivate it. Usually when they present the mental factors, they just describe them, give the definitions of them. But usually in that kind of text, they don't explain how to cultivate them. You have to find that kind of information elsewhere.